there's a kind of silence that doesn't exist in the civilized world. It's a heavy, profound quiet that presses in on your eardrums until they hum with the absence of sound. It's the sound of true isolation. And it was in that absolute silence, miles from any road, any town, any hope of another human soul, that I learned some places are empty for a reason. Some silences are not empty, they're waiting.
Hello and welcome. If you're new here, you can call me your host. Make sure you're settled in, perhaps lock that door behind you. And if you dare to venture deeper into the darkness with me, consider subscribing. Tonight's tale is a testament to the terror of absolute isolation, a story scratched onto the walls of my memory, a warning to those who believe that getting lost is an adventure. It's a story that starts with a map and ends, well, you'll see where it ends. By the time this story is over, you will understand why the true horror of the middle of nowhere isn't what you can see, but what you can't. And the chilling truth of what we left behind in those woods. It was supposed to be the ultimate guy's trip. Me, my brother Leo, and our two best friends, Mark and Chloe. The four of us, crammed into Leo's beat-up Jeep Cherokee, chasing the last weekend of summer into the vast, untamed wilderness of the North Cascades. We weren't seasoned hikers, not by a long shot. Our idea of camping usually involved a designated site, a fire pit, and a cooler full of beer within stumbling distance of the car. But Mark had found this place online, a forum post buried deep in some obscure hiking thread. It spoke of a lake so pristine, so untouched, that it didn't even have a name on any map. The post called it Mirrorvale. The photos, grainy and few, showed water so still it perfectly duplicated the world, a perfect, silent inversion of sky and pine. It was supposed to be a secret, a hidden paradise. We bought the bait, hook, line, and sinker. The drive was all laughter and loud music, the world outside the windows shrinking from suburbs to farmland to dense, imposing forest. The paved roads gave way to gravel, and the gravel eventually surrendered to a pair of faint, muddy ruts cutting through the undergrowth. We were following coordinates, not a road. The GPS on my phone had long since given up, displaying a cheerful no signal in the corner. Leo relied on a folded, old-fashioned topographical map that he'd printed out, the lines so close together they looked like a fingerprint of the gods. The forest closed in around us, the canopy so thick it felt like twilight at 3 in the afternoon. The air grew cold, carrying the rich, decaying scent of wet earth and pine needles. We fell silent, the Jeep's groaning suspension and the crunch of tires on forgotten ground the only sounds. This was the point of no return. We all felt it, a tangible shift in the atmosphere. We had crossed over. After an hour of bone-jarring progress, the ruts finally vanished, swallowed by ferns and fallen logs. We had reached the end of the line. According to the map, Mirrorvale was a 5-mile hike northeast. We shouldered our packs, the mood now somber, charged with a nervous energy. The trail, if you could call it that, was a faint scar in the vegetation, often disappearing altogether. We used the map and a compass, feeling like real adventurers. The woods were ancient. Towering cedars stood like silent sentinels, their trunks wider than my outstretched arms. The light was a filtered, green gloom, and the silence was that deep, pressing kind I told you about. It felt respectful, like we were walking through a cathedral that demanded quiet. We joked at first, our voices unnaturally loud, but soon, we too fell under the spell of the hush. It was Chloe who noticed it first. She stopped dead, holding up a hand. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. We all froze, listening. Nothing. The complete absence of sound. "Exactly," she said, her voice tight. "No birds. No insects. I haven't heard a single cricket or seen a squirrel for over an hour." She was right. The forest was beautifully, terrifyingly dead. No rustle in the underbrush, no chatter from the branches above. It was a museum diorama of a forest, perfect in every detail except for the lack of life. A cold trickle of unease went down my spine. We pressed on, our footsteps now feeling like a desecration. The hike took longer than expected. The terrain was rougher, the map's scale a cruel joke. Dusk was beginning to bleed into the green light, painting everything in long, distorted shadows. We were tired, irritable, and the initial thrill had curdled into a low-grade anxiety. That's when we saw the first cairn. A simple stack of 3 dark, river-smooth stones, about knee-high, placed just off the path. It felt deliberate, man-made. "See?" Mark said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Someone else has been here. We're on the right track." Leo, ever the pragmatic one, frowned. "Or it's a trail marker for a different route. Don't get excited." But 100 yards later, there was another. And another. They were guiding us. The feeling of isolation lessened, replaced by a stranger sensation that we were expected. Finally, as the last of the light was fading, we broke through a final wall of brush and saw it. Mirrorvale. The forum post hadn't done it justice. The lake was a perfect, black oval, nestled in a bowl of sheer granite cliffs. The water was so preternaturally still it looked like a sheet of obsidian glass, perfectly reflecting the bruised purple and orange of the twilight sky. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and yet profoundly wrong. The absolute silence was heaviest here, a physical weight on the surface of the water. Not a single ripple marred its perfection. There were no frogs, no loons, no signs of life at all in or around the water. It was a dead lake in a dead forest. Our laughter felt sacrilegious as we set up camp on a small, pebbly beach. We built a fire, its crackle and pop a welcome defiance of the silence. We cooked dinner, drank a few beers, and tried to shake off the creeping dread, attributing it to fatigue and an overactive imagination. That's when we saw the light. A single pinprick of yellow light, flickering like a candle or a lantern, on the far side of the lake. We all fell silent, staring. "Who else is out here?" I murmured. Leo squinted. "Another camper? Someone else who found the forum post." It was too far to call out to, but its presence was simultaneously comforting and unnerving. We were not alone. But out here, that thought was no longer a comfort. The temperature plummeted with the sun. The cold was damp and invasive, seeping through our jackets. The fire seemed to push back the darkness only a few feet, beyond which the blackness was absolute. We decided to turn in, opting to share the 2-person tent for warmth, a cramped but necessary decision. The silence was so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. Sleep was a long time coming. I was drifting in that gray area between waking and dreaming when I heard it. A sound that shouldn't have been there. A slow, rhythmic crunch, 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 like someone walking with deliberate, heavy steps on the bed of pebbles just outside our tent. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. Next to me, I felt Leo go rigid. He heard it too. The footsteps circled the tent once. Slowly. Deliberately. Then they stopped right by the tent flap. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. The only sound was the frantic drumming of my own heart. Then, a low, wet sound. A sniff. A deep, rattling inhalation, as if whatever was outside was sampling our scent through the nylon of the tent. It lasted for what felt like an eternity. Then, the footsteps began again, crunching away slowly until they were swallowed by the immense silence. None of us slept the rest of the night. The morning dawned gray and cold, a thick mist clinging to the surface of the dead lake. The events of the night felt like a sheer nightmare, but the proof was outside the tent. In the soft mud near the water's edge, clearly visible, was a single footprint. But it was all wrong. It was long and narrow, vaguely humanoid, but with only 4 distinct, claw-like toes. It was deep, implying a heavy weight, and the stride between prints was enormous, far longer than a human's. A cold knot of primal fear tightened in my stomach. We packed up our camp with a frantic, silent urgency. The paradise we'd sought had become a prison. We just wanted to go home. We hit the trail at a pace just short of a run, our heads on a swivel, scanning the dense, misty woods. The cairns were still there, and we followed them back, a desperate lifeline to the world we knew. But after an hour of hard hiking, we found ourselves back at the pebbly shore of Mirrorvale. We'd walked in a perfect, impossible circle. "That's not possible," Leo snapped, unfolding the map with trembling hands. We followed the compass due west. "The trail is clear." But it wasn't. The landmarks we'd noted on the way were gone or rearranged. The forest itself seemed to have shifted. Panic began to set in, cold and slick. We tried again, this time blazing our own trail, marking trees with a knife. We hiked for another 2 hours, our muscles burning, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The mist never lifted, creating a swirling, claustrophobic world of gray-green. And then, through the trees, we saw it. The familiar stack of 3 dark stones. We were back at the lake. It was Mark who broke first. He screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was devoured by the trees. "We're not leaving," he cried, his voice cracking. "It won't let us leave." He was pointing a shaking finger at the cairns. "They're not leading us in. They're keeping us in. They're marking the boundary." That's when we saw the second one. Further down the shore, partly obscured by a bush, was another stack of stones. But this one was different. This one had a 4th stone placed on top, and nestled in the center of the stack was a small, weather-bleached animal skull. A rabbit, maybe. It wasn't a trail marker. It was a shrine. Or a warning. We were trapped in a giant, natural cage, and something had built altars at the edges of its domain. The rest of the day was a blur of terror and futile effort. We tried every direction, every trick of navigation. The compass needle spun lazily, uselessly. The sun never broke through the mist, offering no sense of direction. Every path, no matter how straight we tried to walk, curved inevitably back to the silent, black water of Mirrorvale. We were exhausted, dehydrated, and shivering with a cold that went deeper than the temperature. As dusk began to bleed into the mist for the second time, we had no choice. We had to make camp again. We had no energy to gather more firewood, so we huddled together in the tent, listening to the silence, waiting for the footsteps. They came earlier this time. Crunch, crunch, crunch. A slow, patient circuit around our flimsy nylon shelter. This time, it was accompanied by a sound that I will hear until the day I die. A low, guttural humming. It wasn't a tune, not a melody any human throat could produce. It was a vibration, a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to come from the ground itself, that made my teeth ache and my bones feel brittle. It was a sound of immense age and profound, alien loneliness. It circled us for hours, that awful humming and the crushing footsteps, a predator inspecting its new, trapped prey. The 3rd day dawned, and with it, the first casualty of spirit. Mark was gone. We found him at the water's edge, sitting cross-legged and staring into the black mirror of the lake. He was rocking back and forth slightly, a low, continuous mutter coming from his lips. He wouldn't respond to us. He wouldn't look away from the water. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his pupils were huge, black pools that reflected nothing. He had simply given up. He had accepted this place. Later that afternoon, he was gone. We called for him until our voices were hoarse, but the woods gave back nothing, not even an echo. The silence had taken him. That night, the thing outside didn't just circle. It scratched at the tent. Long, slow, deliberate tears down the nylon fabric with something sharp. We huddled in the center, clutching each other, watching 3 parallel gashes appear in the wall of our shelter, letting in the damp, cold mist and the smell of rot and wet stone. The humming was louder, filled with a new intensity, a dreadful curiosity. It knew we were breaking. On the 4th day, we found the first of the old camps. It was Chloe who stumbled upon it, a choked scream catching in her throat. It was a moldering canvas tent, collapsed in on itself, from decades ago. Inside were the remains of its occupant. Not bones, not really. They were changed. Petrified, fused together with a strange, crystalline growth that glittered dully in the gray light. It was as if the person had been transformed into a mineral formation, a part of the landscape. Scattered around were a rusted canteen, a pair of 70s-style aviator sunglasses, and a journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the last entry was legible. It read, "It doesn't want us to leave. It wants us to stay. It wants us to become part of the quiet." I can hear it singing to the stones. I think I'm starting to understand the song. We found 2 other camps, each from a different era, a 60s-era sleeping bag, an 80s Walkman, each with their own remains, slowly being reclaimed by the forest, transformed into something else. We weren't the first. We were just the latest. That was the day Chloe changed. She stopped talking. She started stacking stones. Small, careful piles, mimicking the cairns that lined the shore. She'd hum a broken, discordant approximation of the thing's nighttime melody. The silence was getting inside her, rewriting her from the inside out. Leo and I were alone, truly alone, in our terror. That night, the thing didn't wait. As full dark fell, it came for the tent. The scratching became tearing. The humming became a deafening, painful drone that felt like it was liquefying my insides. I saw a shape through the ripped fabric. A towering, impossibly thin silhouette, blotting out the misty gloom. It was made of shadows and angles that hurt to look at, with limbs too long, a head that seemed to loll on a slender neck. And its eyes, 2 points of faint, phosphorescent green light, like dying stars. It reached a limb, a thing of jointed darkness and sharp edges, into the tent. It didn't grab for us. It pointed a single, elongated finger at Chloe. She didn't scream. She looked up, and her face was a mask of serene, empty peace. She smiled. She took its hand, and she walked out of the tent with it, into the darkness. We heard its footsteps, now joined by a second, lighter set, crunching away until they faded. The humming stopped. The silence returned, deeper and more absolute than ever before. It had taken its newest acolyte. Leo and I were broken. We spent the next day in a catatonic haze, sitting by the lake, watching the unmoving water. We were waiting for it to take us, to end the terrible, silent anticipation. But as dusk fell on the 5th day, something changed. The mist parted. Not much, but for the first time, we could see a clear path leading into the trees, a path that hadn't been there before. And the cairns that lined it were different. The top stones had been knocked off. It wasn't a path it was giving us. It was a path it was allowing us. We didn't question it. We didn't speak. We just ran. We ran down that path, our bodies fueled by pure, undiluted adrenaline and terror. We didn't look back. The forest seemed to blur around us, the trees themselves shifting to let us pass. The hike that had taken us days on the way was over in what felt like minutes. We burst out of the tree lean, and there, gleaming under a sliver of moon, was Leo's Jeep. We scrambled inside, sobbing with relief, our hands shaking so badly Leo could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a beautiful, mechanical sound that shattered the silence. He threw it into gear and we sped down those muddy ruts, not caring about the branches scraping the paint, not stopping for anything. We didn't stop driving until we hit asphalt, and then the glow of a 24-hour gas station. We sat in the parking lot, under the harsh fluorescent lights, shaking and crying, unable to form words. We were free. We had escaped Mirrorvale. It was only as the sun began to rise, painting the world in normal, same colors, that I looked over at Leo in the driver's seat. He was staring straight ahead, his hands clenched on the steering wheel. He was humming. A low, broken, but unmistakable fragment of that terrible, resonant melody. He turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were wide. And his pupils, they were just a little too black, a little too deep. He saw the terror on my face and the humming stopped. He smiled. It was a small, empty smile. "It's okay," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "It's quieter now." We never spoke of it again. We told the authorities that Mark and Chloe got lost on a hike, that we'd searched for days but couldn't find them. They sent search parties, of course. They found nothing. No trace. The forest, they said, is a big place. Leo moved across the country 6 months later. We don't talk. I try to live a normal life. But every now and then, when the world is perfectly still, late at night, or in the depths of winter, I hear it. Not outside my window. Nothing so obvious. I hear it in the silence. A faint, almost imperceptible hum, vibrating in the marrow of my bones. A reminder that you can leave the middle of nowhere, but sometimes, the middle of nowhere doesn't leave you. Sometimes, it follows you home. And it's just waiting for everything to get quiet again.